My name is Clara Whitmore. I'm 41. And the thing people don't understand about betrayal, real betrayal, is that it almost never announces itself. It doesn't kick down the door or shout its name. It slips in quietly, dressed as familiarity, wearing the face you've already learned how to trust. The night my marriage ended didn't begin with a fight. It began with a text. It was from my husband's ex-girlfriend. "Hi, Clara. Mind if I stop by for dinner tonight? Evan invited me. Just wanted to make sure you were cool with it." I remember staring at the screen, the words floating there like they didn't belong to my life, like they were meant for some other woman. Someone younger, someone messier, someone whose world hadn't been built carefully on the promise of stability. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I sat at the edge of the kitchen island, my phone cooling in my palm, listening to the house breathe around me. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking wall clock we bought years ago, the late afternoon light spilling across the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself. This was my house. Legally, financially, practically, but apparently not emotionally. I typed back, calm enough to surprise even me. "Sure, 7 p.m. works." Then I opened my contacts, scrolled past Evan's name, and called my divorce attorney. I'd been with Evan for 9 years, married for 7. We didn't have children. That used to ache in quiet moments. An empty room in the house I pretended not to notice. Now, in hindsight, it feels like the universe sparing me an extra layer of devastation. We owned a house together. Well, we in the abstract sense. I put down the entire down payment. Every dollar. My savings, my bonuses, the careful money I'd been stacking since my early 30s because I believed in building something permanent. For the past 3 years, I'd paid the mortgage alone. Evan had been finding his footing. His phrase, career exploration, short-term contracts, promises that the next thing would be stable right after this thing ended. I told myself a marriage wasn't supposed to be a ledger, that love wasn't supposed to be who paid what. But somewhere along the way, love turned into subsidy. And I didn't notice when that shift happened, because I was too busy being understanding. Lena, his ex, had been a problem since day one. They dated for 4 years in their 20s. According to Evan, they had a deep connection that transcended romance, the kind of sentence that sounds poetic until you live inside it. When we started dating, he told me they'd stayed friends, and that if I couldn't accept it, I didn't accept him. I was young, in love, eager to be the kind of woman who didn't flinch at the word ex, so I swallowed the discomfort and told myself I was being mature. For 9 years, I watched Lena insert herself into my marriage at every opportunity. She showed up at our engagement party to congratulate us, smiling like she was proud of something she'd helped build. She came to our wedding as a guest Evan invited, and he didn't tell me until a week before, as if timing could soften disrespect. She texted him constantly, called him late at night when she was going through something, and somehow she always needed his emotional support through her endless stream of broken relationships. Every time I brought it up, the conversation ended the same way. I was insecure. I didn't understand their friendship. If I really loved him, I'd trust him. So I tried. God, I tried. I swallowed my discomfort and told myself I was being the bigger person. I smiled through dinners where she sat too close. I tolerated the casual intimacy between them. An inside joke here, a look there, like I was supposed to be grateful they were honest about being friends. Eventually, being secure just became another way of saying, be quiet. 3 weeks ago, something changed. I was working from home that afternoon. My laptop was open. My headphones were around my neck, not plugged in. Evan thought I was on a call. I wasn't. He took his phone into the other room and started talking, softly, the way people talk when they think no one can hear them. "I know," he said. "I miss you too." My whole body went cold. "No, she doesn't suspect anything," he continued. "It's not like that. It's just, we have a connection she'll never really understand." My hands tightened around the edge of the counter until my fingers hurt. "Next Thursday works," he said. "She has that conference thing." I sat there frozen. 9 years of defending him. 9 years of trusting him. 9 years of being told I was the problem for feeling uncomfortable. And here he was, confirming every fear I'd ever buried. I didn't confront him. What would be the point? He would have gaslit me again. Told me I misheard. That I was paranoid. That Lena was family, and I was making it weird. Instead, I did the only rational thing left. I started gathering information. Over the next 2 weeks, I documented everything. The calls, the texts I could see on our shared iPad when he forgot to log out, the work lunches that lasted 3 hours. The Thursday he came home smelling like Lena's perfume. Yes, I knew it. She'd been around enough to leave a signature in my life. Hotel charges. Restaurants for two at places he swore were networking. The kind of evidence that doesn't argue back, doesn't twist itself into a misunderstanding. I also contacted a divorce attorney. I explained the situation and asked what I needed to do to protect myself. He told me the truth. Adultery didn't always matter in asset division, but documented financial irresponsibility and contribution disparity did. And spending marital funds on an affair, hotels, meals, gifts, could absolutely matter. Given that I'd been paying the mortgage, the utilities, most living expenses for years while Evan figured out his path, I was in a strong position. Then last Tuesday, the text came that changed everything. From Lena. Hey Clara, mind if I stop by for dinner tonight? Evan invited me. Just wanted to make sure you were cool with it. The audacity sat in my chest like a stone. I stared at it for a full 5 minutes. Then I typed back. Sure, 7 p.m. works. Looking forward to it. And then I called my attorney. Because if my husband wanted to invite his ex into my home for dinner like I was supposed to smile and make room, fine, I would make room. Right at the table. For the truth. For a long time, I told myself that Lena's presence in our marriage was temporary. A phase. A holdover from Evan's past that would eventually fade as our life together grew louder, fuller, more permanent. I was wrong. Lena didn't fade. She embedded. She existed in the margins of our marriage at first. Little enough that I could pretend it didn't matter. A text here, a call there. The occasional mention of her name dropped casually into conversation, as if she were a coworker or a distant cousin. She's having a rough week, Evan would say, glancing at his phone. She just needs someone to talk to. I learned early that the right response wasn't curiosity or concern. It was neutrality. Indifference performed well enough to pass as confidence. So I nodded, kept cooking, kept folding laundry, kept telling myself that secure women didn't keep score. But over the years, Lena's presence stopped being peripheral. She showed up, physically, emotionally, repeatedly. She appeared at our engagement party wearing a pale blue dress that looked suspiciously bridal adjacent, hugging Evan for just a second longer than necessary, whispering something in his ear that made him laugh. She's happy for us, he'd said later when I asked, carefully, why she'd needed a private moment. She's known me a long time. Then she came to our wedding. That was the first time I remember feeling something crack. He told me a week before the ceremony, while we were finalizing seating arrangements. Oh, by the way, he said, not looking up from his laptop, Lena's coming. I laughed once, because I genuinely thought he was joking. You're serious? She's part of my life, he replied. It would be weird not to invite her. We didn't fight about it. Not really. I swallowed the feeling and told myself it would be petty to make an issue out of it days before the wedding. But on the day itself, when I saw her sitting there among our guests, smiling, composed, familiar, it felt like a quiet violation. She wasn't a stranger. She was someone who knew my husband in ways I never would. And she had been invited to witness a vow that was supposed to mark the end of her chapter. After we were married, I expected boundaries to materialize naturally. Marriage, I believed, changed the rules. Instead, Lena's access to Evan only deepened. She texted him constantly. Not flirtatious messages, nothing that could be easily confronted, just the steady drip of intimacy. How are you holding up today? I had a dream about you last night. You're the only one who really gets me. She called late at night when her relationships imploded, which they always did. Evan would step out onto the porch or into the guest room, his voice low and gentle, like he was afraid of being overheard by something sacred. She's crying, he'd explain afterward. I couldn't just hang up on her. And if I hesitated, if my mouth tightened or my shoulders stiffened, he noticed immediately. What? He'd ask. You're not jealous, are you? The word jealous hung between us like a threat. I learned quickly that once it entered the conversation, I'd already lost. So I learned new language. I just want to understand. I'm not saying you can't talk to her. I trust you. I just need reassurance. Each attempt ended the same way. He'd sigh, look wounded. Clara, we've been over this. She's just a friend. You're projecting. If you really trusted me, this wouldn't bother you. And because I loved him, and because I wanted to be loved back, I internalized it. I told myself the discomfort was my issue to fix. I told myself that strong marriages weren't threatened by old connections. I told myself a lot of things. The truth was, Lena didn't behave like someone who had lost access. She behaved like someone who had simply shifted roles. She stopped being the girlfriend and became something harder to name, and therefore harder to challenge. She needed Evan, and Evan needed to be needed. That realization came slowly, in pieces. The way he'd light up when her name appeared on his phone. The way he defended her reflexively, even when I hadn't criticized her. The way my concerns were framed as attacks on his character. She's been there for me when no one else was. She understands me. She doesn't make everything complicated. That last one stayed with me. Because our marriage had started to feel very complicated, mostly because I was the only one asking questions. I remember one night in particular. We were lying in bed, the room dark except for the glow of his phone. He'd just gotten off a call with Lena, another crisis, another emotional cleanup job. I turned toward him and said quietly, "Do you ever think it's strange that she comes to you instead of the person she's dating?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "You're reading too much into it." I pressed on, my voice still calm. "I just feel like there should be some boundaries now that we're married." That did it. He sat up, suddenly alert. "So now I'm not allowed to have friends?" "That's not what I said." "You always do this," he snapped. "You turn everything into an accusation." I felt myself shrinking, even as anger flickered underneath. "I'm not accusing you," I said. "I'm telling you how this makes me feel." He shook his head. "You're making me choose, and that's not fair." The conversation ended the way they always did, with me apologizing for upsetting him, and him falling asleep convinced he'd been wronged. I stared at the ceiling that night, listening to his breathing even out, and wondered how I'd become the villain in my own marriage. By the time I overheard that phone call 3 weeks ago, something in me already knew. Not consciously, not in a way I was ready to admit, but my body knew. It knew in the tightness in my chest every time his phone buzzed. It knew in the way silence between us felt heavy instead of peaceful. It knew in the exhaustion of constantly proving I was secure enough to deserve honesty. Lena hadn't just stayed in Evan's life. She'd been allowed to grow roots there. And I had been trained, slowly, carefully, to doubt myself every time I noticed. That was the real betrayal. Not just the affair I was about to uncover, but the years I spent being taught that my instincts were something to be corrected instead of respected. The moment didn't arrive with drama. No slammed doors. No raised voices. No sudden realization delivered like a lightning strike. It crept in quietly, like most truths do when they've been waiting a long time to be acknowledged. I was working from home that afternoon, seated at the dining table with my laptop open and a half-empty mug of coffee cooling beside it. The house was calm in that familiar weekday way, soft, predictable, safe enough to lower your guard. Evan walked past me with his phone already in his hand. "I'm just going to take this in the bedroom," he said casually, the way people do when they don't think they need permission. I nodded without looking up. My headphones were around my neck, not plugged in. He didn't notice. The bedroom door didn't fully close. At first, I didn't register the words, just the tone, lowered, intimate, careful. "I know," he said softly. "I miss you too." My fingers stilled on the keyboard. I told myself I was mishearing, that it was about work, that it was a joke taken out of context. I'd trained myself well over the years. Then he laughed, quietly, the way he only ever did with her. "No," he continued. "She doesn't suspect anything." The air left my lungs. "It's not like that," he said. "It's just, we have a connection she'll never really understand." I stood up without realizing it, the chair scraping softly against the floor. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid he'd hear it. "Next Thursday works," he went on. "She has that conference thing." I don't remember moving to the kitchen. I don't remember sitting down. I only remember the way my entire body went cold, like I'd been submerged in ice water and forgotten how to breathe. 9 years. 9 years of swallowing my discomfort, of being told I was insecure, of questioning my own instincts because the man I loved insisted I was wrong. And here he was, confirming every fear I'd buried to keep our marriage intact. I waited until the call ended. I waited until he came out of the bedroom, acting normal, asking if I wanted tea, like nothing had just detonated my life. I said yes. That was the most terrifying part. I said yes. That night, I lay awake next to him, staring at the ceiling while he slept. His breathing was steady, familiar. The sound of a man completely at ease, unburdened by the knowledge that his wife was lying inches away, replaying his words on a loop. "She doesn't suspect anything. We have a connection she'll never understand." I thought about all the times I'd asked him, gently, carefully, if everything was okay, if we were okay, how quickly he'd reassured me, how easily he'd lied. By morning, something in me had shifted, not into rage, into clarity. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry or accuse or demand explanations I already knew would be denied. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I trusted myself. The first thing I did was start paying attention. Not emotionally, strategically. I noticed how often he stepped out to take calls, how quickly he angled his phone away from me when texts came in, how often his work lunches stretched past 3 hours. I checked our shared iPad one afternoon when he forgot to log out. Messages don't look as harmless when you're no longer trying to interpret them kindly. I wish I was there. Soon. Thursday can't come fast enough. I took screenshots. I wrote dates down. I stopped filling in the blanks with excuses. Then there were the receipts. Hotel charges on our shared credit card. Small enough amounts to avoid attention, but frequent enough to form a pattern. Restaurants I'd never been to. A Thursday when he came home smelling like Lena's perfume. I recognized it instantly. She'd worn it to our wedding. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke clearly enough on its own. A week later, I sat in a quiet office across from a divorce attorney and laid everything out. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he folded his hands and said, "I'll be honest with you. Adultery alone doesn't always change asset division in this state." I nodded. I wasn't there for revenge. "But," he continued, "documented financial disparity and the use of marital funds for an affair absolutely can." He asked who'd paid the mortgage. "Me," I said. "How long?" "3 years." He asked about utilities, groceries, insurance. "Me," I repeated. He leaned back slightly. "Then you're in a strong position." I walked out of that office lighter than I'd felt in weeks. Not because my marriage was ending, but because for the first time in years, reality wasn't being denied. The final piece fell into place the following Tuesday. I was in the kitchen when my phone buzzed. Unknown contact. I opened the message. "Hey Clara, mind if I stop by for dinner tonight? Evan invited me. Just wanted to make sure you were cool with it." I stared at the screen, at the casual confidence, at the assumption that my consent was a formality. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, I typed back, "Sure, 7 p.m. works." Then I opened my contacts and called my attorney. "How fast can you get divorce papers drafted?" I asked. There was a pause on the other end. "That's quick," he said. "Are you sure?" I looked around my kitchen, the house I'd paid for, the life I'd held together, the silence that finally felt honest. I've never been more sure of anything. Because if my husband wanted to invite his ex-girlfriend into my home like I was supposed to smile and make room, fine, I would make room for the truth. Once you stop trying to protect the lie, the truth becomes painfully organized. That was the strangest part. How neat everything suddenly looked when I stopped scrambling to explain it away. I didn't snoop in a frenzy. I didn't spiral. I didn't turn into the hysterical wife people like to imagine when a woman realizes her marriage is built on deception. I became methodical. Every morning, I wrote the date at the top of a notebook I had hidden in my desk drawer. I logged times, durations, excuses. Tuesday, lunch with a recruiter. Gone 3 hours. Thursday, team building happy hour. Hotel charge posted at 11:42 p.m. I stopped asking questions out loud and started answering them privately. The shared iPad became my silent accomplice. Evan was careless with it, always had been. He'd forget to log out of his accounts, assuming I wouldn't look. Or that if I did, I'd keep doing what I'd always done, interpret generously. I stopped being generous. Messages that once read as harmless now landed differently. "I hate leaving you. Soon." Next Thursday feels too far away. No emojis, no explicit declarations. Just intimacy, familiarity, certainty. I took screenshots, backed them up, labeled them with dates and times. I didn't cry when I found them. I felt vindicated, not in a triumphant way, in a hollow, grounding way, like finally touching the bottom after years of treading water. The receipts were worse. Hotel charges scattered across our shared credit card statement. Marriott, Hilton. Places I'd never stayed with him, but recognized instantly. Restaurants listed as business meals that I knew for a fact were not within walking distance of his office. A spa charge he'd once explained away as a networking event. 2 people don't network during a couple's massage. I highlighted everything. I totaled the amounts. I stopped keeping track for emotional reasons and started keeping track for legal ones. And that was when I realized something that made my stomach twist harder than the affair itself. This wasn't reckless passion. This was sustained, planned, budgeted deceit. Evan, meanwhile, carried on as usual. He kissed my cheek in the mornings, asked about my day, complained about traffic and emails and people who didn't get him. One night, while we were cleaning up after dinner, he looked at me and said, "You've been quiet lately." I shrugged, "Just tired." He nodded, relieved. He didn't press. Why would he? Silence had always worked in his favor. A few days later, I sat across from my attorney again. This time, I brought the notebook. I laid it on his desk and opened it carefully, like it was something fragile, which, in a way, it was. 9 years of trust reduced to bullet points. He flipped through the pages slowly. "This is good," he said. "Very good." That word, good, felt surreal in the context of my marriage imploding. He explained things clearly without sugarcoating. Adultery alone wouldn't guarantee anything. But the financial picture, that mattered. I had paid the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, most of the groceries. While Evan figured things out, I had funded our entire life. And while I was doing that, he had been diverting marital funds to facilitate an affair. Dissipation of marital assets, my attorney said. That's the term. I repeated it silently, letting it settle. Dissipation. Such a clean word for something so corrosive. He told me what to expect, what not to do, what would strengthen my position. Stay calm, he advised. Don't confront him yet. Let the evidence speak. I left that office with a checklist. And for the first time since the phone call, I felt in control. The house felt different during those days. Not tense, honest. Every object suddenly looked like what it was. Neutral. Unsentimental. The couch where we watched movies. The dining table where we hosted friends. The bedroom where I'd spent years believing intimacy meant safety. I stopped attaching meaning to things that hadn't protected me. Instead, I focused on timing. On logistics. On making sure the end, when it came, would be definitive. When Lena texted me that Tuesday afternoon, I wasn't shocked. I was ready. The audacity of it still stunned me. Her casual assumption that my consent was a courtesy, not a boundary. But it also clarified something important. They weren't hiding anymore. They were comfortable, and comfortable people make mistakes. I stared at the message, then glanced at the notebook in my drawer. At the dates, the numbers, the truth that no one could talk their way out of. Sure, 7 p.m. works. As soon as I sent it, I called my attorney. I need the papers ready tonight, I said. There was a pause. That's unconventional, he replied carefully. So was inviting his ex to dinner without telling his wife, I said. I think we're past conventional. Another pause. Then, I'll make it happen. I hung up and stood alone in my kitchen, listening to the quiet. This wasn't revenge. It was resolution. If Evan wanted to turn our home into a meeting place for his double life, then the truth would be served right there, at the table. The rest of the afternoon moved with a strange, dreamlike efficiency. I didn't rush. I didn't pace. I didn't rehearse speeches in my head. I cleaned. Not because the house needed it, but because there was something grounding about restoring order to a place that had quietly held so much disorder for so long. I wiped down the counters, set the table for 3. 3. The number felt symbolic in a way I didn't fully unpack at the time. I pulled out the good plates, the ones we used when we wanted to look like a couple who had their life together. The heavy silverware. Cloth napkins I hadn't bothered with in months. I lit candles, not because I wanted romance, but because I wanted contrast. If the truth was going to detonate, it might as well do so against something beautiful. I chose Evan's favorite meal. Grilled salmon, asparagus, roasted potatoes with rosemary. It felt almost ceremonial, like I was cooking for a version of us that had already stopped existing. At 5:30, Evan came home. He stopped short in the doorway, eyes flicking from the table to the kitchen to me. "What's all this?" he asked. I smiled, just enough to seem casual. I felt like doing something nice. His shoulders relaxed immediately. "Is something going on?" I shook my head. "Your friend is coming for dinner, right?" The word friend landed between us. He froze, just for a second, but I saw it. "Oh," he said lightly. "She told you?" "She texted," I replied. Very polite of her, actually. More consideration than I usually get. He laughed, a little too quickly. "I was going to tell you," he said. "It just came up last minute. She's having a rough time." Of course she was. "And it's fine," he added quickly. "I told her 7 would work." I nodded. 7 works. He studied me, suspicion flickering behind his eyes. In 9 years, I'd never been this calm about Lena coming over. Usually there was tension. Arguments, carefully worded conversations where I tried to explain why it bothered me without sounding unreasonable. "Not tonight." "Okay," he said slowly. "I'm going to change." As he walked away, I noticed something else. Relief. He thought he'd won. At 6:45, I poured the wine. At 6:55, I turned the oven down. At 7:05, the doorbell rang. I answered it myself. Lena stood on the porch, smiling like she belonged there, like she'd never left. "Hi, Clara," she said warmly. "Thanks for having me." "Of course," I replied. "Come in." Evan appeared behind me, visibly surprised. "Oh, hey," he said, as if he hadn't orchestrated the entire evening. Lena hugged him. Too close, too familiar. I stepped back and gestured toward the dining room. "Dinner's ready." They exchanged a look. Not alarmed, not guilty. Comfortable. That hurt more than I expected. Dinner was surreal. The three of us sat at the table, passing dishes, making small talk like actors who knew their lines by heart. Lena laughed easily, touched Evan's arm when she did, leaned in just a little too far when she spoke. Evan didn't stop her. He didn't notice me noticing. At one point, Lena said, "This is delicious, Clara. You always were such a good cook." Always. Like she'd been around long enough to make that claim. I smiled. "Thank you." I watched them. The glances, the shared pauses, the way they filled in each other's sentences without thinking. They thought they were getting away with it. They thought the performance was for my benefit. They were wrong. At 7:32, the doorbell rang again. "I'll get it," I said, standing. Evan frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" "Probably just a delivery," I replied. I opened the door. The process server stood there, exactly on time. I handed him the envelope I'd prepared earlier, along with the tip folded neatly inside. "Living room," I said quietly. "The woman at the table. Her name is on the papers." He nodded and stepped inside with professional efficiency. I stayed by the door. From where I stood, I could see everything. "Are you Evan's wife?" the man asked. Lena looked up first, confused. I watched Evan's face drain of color. "Yes," I said before he could speak. The process server handed me the envelope. "You've been served," he said politely. "Have a good evening." And then he left. The silence that followed was deafening. I walked back to the table and placed the papers gently in front of Evan. "Divorce papers," I said. "Seemed like a good time, since we're all here together." Lena stood abruptly. What is this?" she stammered. Evan stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "Clara," he said, voice shaking. "What's happening?" I met his eyes. "What's happening," I said calmly, "is that I'm divorcing my husband, the man who's been sleeping with his ex-girlfriend while I paid for everything." Lena's mouth opened. This isn't... I cut her off. "I've heard the phone calls," I said. "I've seen the texts. I've documented the hotel visits." I turned to Evan. "The Marriott on the 14th. The Hilton 3 weeks before that. Charged to our card. Very classy." Lena was crying now. "You don't understand," she said. "Oh," I replied quietly. "I understand perfectly." And for the first time that night, they realized the performance was over. For a moment, no one moved. The candles flickered. The wine glasses sat half full. The food cooled on our plates like it had forgotten why it was made. Evan was still staring at the envelope, his name printed there in sharp, unforgiving ink. He didn't touch it, didn't open it, as if pretending it wasn't real might undo the last 30 seconds. Lena was the first to break. "This is insane," she said, her voice thin, brittle. "Clara, you're overreacting. Nothing is happening." I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. "Nothing," I repeated. "That's interesting, considering I've heard you tell my husband you miss him, considering I've seen messages planning hotel stays, considering you've both charged those hotels to our credit card." Evan finally looked up. "Clara, please," he said. "Let's not do this in front of her." I tilted my head. "In front of her? Evan, she's been in the middle of our marriage for 9 years. This is exactly where she belongs for this conversation." Lena grabbed her jacket from the back of the chair. "I'm leaving," she said. "This is between you two." "No," I said calmly. "Stay. You've eaten my food, sat at my table, slept with my husband. The least you can do is hear the consequences." Evan stood up then, panic bleeding through his voice. "She's wrong," he said to Lena, not to me. "She doesn't know what she's talking about." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "The Marriott on the 14th, I said again, meeting his eyes. "Room charge at 11:42 p.m. The Hilton 3 weeks before that. Dinner at Sorella. 2 entrees, 1 dessert, paid with our card. Should I keep going?" His shoulders slumped. Lena's face went white. "You went through his things?" she whispered. "No," I corrected. "I went through our finances, the ones I pay for." She started crying then. Real tears, streaking mascara, hands trembling as she tried to explain. "You don't understand," she said. "We have history. It just happened." I looked at her for a long moment. "No," I said quietly. "It didn't just happen. It happened over and over again, and every time you both chose it." Evan reached for my arm. I stepped back. "Don't," I said. That single word landed harder than any scream. Lena bolted for the door after that, muttering apologies that sounded more like self-preservation than remorse. She didn't look back. The door slammed, and suddenly it was just the two of us. Evan collapsed into the chair across from me, like his bones had finally given up. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said. "I never planned for it to go this far." I folded my hands on the table. "You planned hotel rooms," I said. "You planned lies. You planned to meet her while I was out of town. What part of that wasn't planning?" He rubbed his face, tears spilling freely now. "You've been distant," he said. "You work all the time." You don't understand what I need." There it was. The pivot. The blame. I felt nothing. "I worked," I said evenly, "to keep this house, to pay the mortgage, to support you while you found yourself. And while I did that, you found her." He shook his head. "You're twisting everything." "No," I replied. "I stopped twisting myself." He tried again. Apologies, excuses, confessions that changed shape depending on what he thought might work. I listened without engaging. When he finally ran out of steam, I stood. "The papers outline my position," I said. "Have your lawyer contact mine." "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, voice small. I met his eyes one last time. "That stopped being my responsibility when you stopped being my husband." He left that night with a duffel bag. I stayed, alone in the house I had paid for, at the table where the truth had finally been served. I changed the locks the next morning. Not out of spite, out of necessity. The days that followed blurred together. Evan tried to come back once, stood on the porch with his old key, confused when it didn't work. I watched him through the door camera sit down and cry for 20 minutes before leaving. I didn't open the door. His mother called on day 3. She'd always liked me, always said she was grateful he'd found someone so stable. "Whatever happened," she said carefully, "he loves you." "He had an affair with his ex," I replied, "for months, maybe longer." Silence. Then, "He told me you'd grown apart." "That's convenient," I said. "The truth is documented. Hotel charges, texts, phone calls." She didn't argue after that. She didn't call again. On day 5, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. It was Lena's husband. "Yes," I said when he asked. "It's true." We talked for half an hour, two strangers bonded by the same betrayal. He was filing for divorce too. Apparently, my husband wasn't the only one who'd been lied to. That knowledge didn't comfort me, but it clarified things. This wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. And patterns don't deserve forgiveness. They deserve endings. By the end of the first week, the silence around me had teeth. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't healing yet. It was the kind of quiet that forces you to hear your own thoughts, whether you're ready or not. Evan, however, filled the gaps with noise. Day 2 after the dinner, he showed up at the house while I was at work. I know because my phone buzzed with motion alerts from the door camera. I watched from my office desk as he tried the old key once, twice, then stood there staring at the lock like it had personally betrayed him. When he finally sat down on the porch steps and buried his face in his hands, a small, traitorous part of me felt something tug. Not love, habit. 7 years of marriage doesn't dissolve just because the truth shows up on time. But I didn't go home. I didn't call him. I didn't unlock the door remotely like I easily could have. I let the recording run. 20 minutes later, he left. Empty-handed. Day 3, his mother called. I answered because, unlike her son, she hadn't spent years training me to doubt my reality. "Clara," she said gently, "he's devastated. Whatever happened, he still loves you." I closed my eyes. "He was having an affair with his ex," I said calmly. "The one he told me for years was just a friend." There was a pause long enough that I could hear her breathing shift. "He told me you two had grown apart," she said quietly, "that you were emotionally unavailable." "That's the version he gives people," I replied. "The real version includes hotel rooms charged to our credit card and texts planning meetups while I was out of town." Another pause. "I didn't know," she said. "I believe you," I answered, "because he only tells people what keeps him comfortable." She didn't defend him after that. She didn't call again. I heard later, from a mutual friend, that she confronted Evan about the charges, that the conversation didn't go well, that he yelled, that she cried. I felt a flicker of guilt for dragging her into it. Then I remembered how long I'd been the only one carrying reality on my back. Day 5 was when everything widened. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Clara?" a woman asked. "Yes." "This is Megan," she said. "Evan's, well, Lena's husband." My grip tightened around the phone. "I'm sorry," she continued. "I didn't know who else to call. I found messages, hotel receipts, and then I found your number." I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "it's true." She exhaled shakily. "I thought so. I found her underwear in his car last week. I just needed to know who." We talked for 30 minutes. 2 women circling the same wreckage from opposite sides. She told me Evan and Lena joked about their spouses in the text sheet uncovered, called us clueless, talked about how easy it was to keep their worlds separate. That part hurt more than I expected. Not the affair, the mockery. To be lied to is one thing. To be laughed at while it happens is something else entirely. Megan told me she was filing for divorce. I told her I already had. Neither of us sounded surprised. By the end of the week, Evan's lawyer reached out. The opening demand was aggressive. Half the house equity, spousal support, and a portion of my retirement accounts. The justification? He'd supported the household emotionally while sacrificing career opportunities for our marriage. I almost laughed when my attorney read it aloud. My response was quiet. Counter, I said. We countered with documentation. 3 years of mortgage payments from my account. Utilities, insurance, groceries, and then the affair expenses, hotels, meals, gifts, itemized, time-stamped, undeniable. My attorney called their position weak. Evan called it cruel. Day 8, I received one final text from an unknown number. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know. She pursued me. She said you two were basically separated. I believed her. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, You knew she was married. You came to my house. You ate my food. You slept with my husband. I don't care who pursued who. You're both adults who made choices. Now you're facing consequences. Don't contact me again. He didn't respond. I didn't expect him to, because people like Evan and Lena only reach out when they're trying to rewrite the ending. And I was done letting anyone edit my reality. By the time the financial discovery process began, I was no longer surprised by anything. That numbness people talk about after betrayal, it's real, but it doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means your emotions finally line up behind logic instead of fighting it. The paperwork arrived in waves. Bank statements, credit card records, travel histories. 3 years' worth of proof that what Evan called a rough patch was actually a long-term transfer of responsibility from him to me. I sat at the dining table with my attorney, papers spread out like a forensic map of my marriage. Here, he said, tapping a highlighted section, beyond the hotels you already knew about. There were restaurant charges for 2, at places Evan had claimed were work dinners. Gifts purchased on holidays I'd spent alone because he was busy. Salon and spa charges he'd explained away as networking events. The total stunned me. Over $8,000 in unexplained spending tied directly to the affair. My attorney didn't soften it. Networking doesn't usually include couples massage packages, he said dryly. Evan's explanation, delivered through his lawyer, was predictable. Self-care, professional image, stress management. I didn't react. I didn't need to. The numbers spoke louder than anything he could say. Day 12 brought a new tactic. I was at work when my phone buzzed. Security from the front desk. There's a man here asking for you, the receptionist said carefully. He says he's your husband. My stomach tightened. I hadn't told Evan where I worked. Not officially. He must have pieced it together from old conversations, old emails. I don't want to see him, I said. She hesitated. He's emotional. I still don't want to see him. Minutes later, I watched from my office window as security escorted him out of the building. He was crying, loudly, making sure people noticed. HR called me that afternoon. They were kind, professional. They asked if I wanted to file anything formal. Not yet, I said, but please document it. I was done pretending his behavior wasn't escalating. Day 14, the narrative war started. Evan reached out to mutual friends, to former colleagues, to anyone who would listen. His version was clean and tragic. He'd been blindsided, served divorce papers without warning, punished publicly for mistakes that could have been worked through. A few people texted me, hesitant but curious. Is this true? Did you really not give him a chance? I sent the same response to all of them. Ask him about the Marriott on October 14th. Then decide. Most never replied. 2 did. Friends I'd known since before Evan, before the marriage, before I learned how to doubt myself. They said they'd always felt something was off, that Lena's presence had never made sense, that they hadn't wanted to interfere. I didn't blame them. I blamed myself for ignoring the same feeling. Day 16 brought the document that finally broke through my numbness. Phone records. 2 years. The affair hadn't started recently. It hadn't been a lapse. It had been ongoing for almost 2 full years. 2 years of texts sent from my kitchen. 2 years of hotel rooms booked while I paid the mortgage. 2 years of gaslighting every time I asked if something was wrong. I took a day off work after reading them, sat alone in the house, my house, and let the scope of it wash over me. 9 years together. 2 of them completely fake. I didn't cry. I just sat there, realizing how carefully deception can be maintained when one person is committed to believing. By day 18, Evan's lawyer revised their offer. No more spousal support. Still half the house equity. 40% of my retirement accounts. Progress, my attorney said. Not enough, I replied. We countered again. 25% of the house equity after subtracting the full down payment I'd made. 30% of retirement accounts, and reimbursement of half the documented affair expenses from his share. Their lawyer called it punitive. Mine called it fair. The mediation session was scheduled for day 22. When Evan walked into the room, he looked smaller, like someone who had spent weeks trying to control a narrative that no longer belonged to him. His lawyer spoke first. Emotional contribution, sacrificed opportunities, a marriage that had lost connection. Then my attorney spoke. Financial facts, timelines, evidence of dissipation of marital assets. The mediator listened quietly, then asked the question everyone pretends not to hear. Is reconciliation possible? No, I said immediately. Evan started crying. I still love you, he said. I looked at him. That's interesting, I replied calmly, because according to the text, you called me clueless while planning hotel visits with your ex. The mediator called a break after that. In the hallway, Evan approached me. I didn't mean those things, he said desperately. I was caught up in something I couldn't control. I met his eyes. You controlled it for 2 years, I said. Every text, every lie, every choice. He had nothing to say to that. And for the first time, I knew the end was no longer a threat. It was inevitable. Day 38. That was the day everything finally stopped moving. The papers were signed the afternoon before, clean signatures, calm voices, the dull finality of something that had been unraveling for years. By the time I left my attorney's office, the sun was already low, the sky the same washed-out blue it had been the day I overheard that phone call. The settlement wasn't everything I wanted, but it was enough. I kept the house. Evan received 30% of the equity, calculated after subtracting the full down payment I'd made. It came out to about $45,000, not the $120,000 he'd originally demanded. There was no spousal support. His earning capacity and the documented timeline of his dependents made that request untenable. The retirement accounts were split in my favor, and the mediator agreed that $4,000 of the documented affair expenses qualified as dissipation of marital assets. That amount came directly out of his share. His lawyer fought that one hardest, but hotel receipts don't argue. I heard later, through Megan, that Lena's divorce finalized the same week. Her husband had documentation too, and a lot less patience. Primary custody of their daughter, the house, significant support. Apparently, Evan wasn't the first married man Lena had entangled herself with, just the first one whose wife kept records. From what I understand, Evan and Lena aren't even speaking now. Their deep connection that transcended romance didn't survive legal fees, divided assets, and the sudden absence of secrecy. Funny how that works. The house felt different once it was officially mine. Not better, not worse, just quieter. I kept sleeping on my side of the bed for weeks out of habit, kept reaching for his coffee brand at the grocery store before catching myself and putting it back. 9 years doesn't evaporate because ink dries. Some people asked if I regretted how I handled it. The dinner, the public serving of papers. Maybe it was dramatic. Maybe it was petty. But after 9 years of being told I was crazy for being uncomfortable, 9 years of swallowing instincts to protect someone else's comfort, I think I earned one moment of truth, served exactly where the lies had lived. Evan texted me once after the final signatures. I'm sorry it ended this way. I did love you. I didn't respond. What would I say? That love doesn't book hotel rooms in secret? That love doesn't call its partner clueless? That love doesn't demand silence as proof of trust? If that was his version of love, I wanted no part of it. I repainted the bedroom the following weekend. He'd chosen the sage green. I'd never liked it. I went with a soft gray. Neutral, clean, mine. Work became a refuge. My boss was understanding about the time off for legal appointments. My coworkers knew something had happened but didn't pry. I appreciated that more than they knew. My social circle shifted. Some people chose his side, some chose mine. Most drifted away, uncomfortable with choosing at all. 2 friends stayed. We went out for drinks one night and talked about everything except the divorce. It felt like breathing again. I'm not dating. I don't want to yet. I'm spending time understanding why I ignored my instincts for so long. Why being the secure partner mattered more to me than being safe. My therapist says it's about rebuilding trust in myself. That sounds right. Some nights I still get angry. Not at Evan. That burned itself out during mediation. I'm angry at the version of myself who believed love required silence, who confused endurance with loyalty, who thought discomfort was something to overcome instead of a warning to listen to. But mostly I feel relief. Relief that the quiet in my house is just quiet now. Not the tense silence of someone waiting for another lie. He made his choice. She made hers. And I finally made mine. I chose myself.